You are about to listen to the second part of the tale of Enki, a boy looking for something his village needs in order to survive. We left off as Enki just made it to the Sunlands, a place where the earth sang a hymn to the heavens, whispering secrets of life in defiance of the arid wind, and where trees look like emerald canopies swaying as if in conversation with the sun. Let's listen and see what happens next. The elder led Enki into the heart of the Sunlands, where the true depth of the community revealed itself. Rows of crops stretched endlessly, tended by groups of villagers working together in rhythmic harmony. Animals grazed peacefully, their coats glossy and healthy, a stark contrast to the thin, struggling livestock of Enki's village. The homes, though simple, were vibrant, decorated with colorful fabrics and carved wood. Everywhere Enki looked, there was life. "Your arrival is unexpected," the elder said as they walked, his tone measured but kind. "The Sunlands is not an easy place to find, and few outside our people have ever stepped foot here." "I didn't know I was coming here," Enki admitted. "It was a fox that led me, and a dream." The elder paused, studying Enki for a long moment before nodding thoughtfully. "Perhaps the fox knew what you did not." They continued walking until they reached a large circular space at the village's center. A tree stood at its heart, its wide branches casting dappled shadows across the ground. The villagers gathered around, their eyes filled with curiosity and skepticism as they watched Enki. "This is our meeting place," the elder explained, "where we come together to share, to teach, and to prepare for the trials ahead." The elder turned to face Enki fully, his expression serious. "If you are to stay among us, you must understand what it means to live with abundance. Here in the Sunlands, we do not take lightly the blessings we have worked so hard to cultivate." "I want to learn," Enki said earnestly. "Teach me." The elder gestured to a nearby villager who handed him a small, smooth seed. He held it out to Enki. "Plant this in the soil. Not just with your hands, but with your heart and your mind. You must visualize its growth, nurture it, and believe in its potential. Only then will you understand the true nature of abundance." Enki took the seed carefully, its weight feeling heavier than it should. He glanced at the elder, then at the gathered villagers, who watched him with a mix of hope and doubt. Slowly he knelt by the tree, dug a small hole, and placed the seed into the earth. He covered it gently, pressing his hands against the soil. "Now what?" he asked, looking up. The elder smiled faintly. "Now, you wait, and while you wait, you learn." Over the next several days, Enki immersed himself in the daily life of the Sunlands. He rose early with the villagers, joining them in their gratitude circle, where each person shared what they were thankful for. At first, Enki found it strange. He had grown used to the complaints and worries of his own village. But here, even in the face of challenges, the people focused on what they had, not what they lacked. "I am grateful for the rain that will come," a woman said one morning, her voice steady and sure. "Even if it is not here today, I trust that it will arrive." "I am grateful for the strength of my hands," a farmer added, flexing his calloused fingers. "They have never failed me." Enki, hesitant at first, found himself participating. "I am grateful for the chance to learn," he said one morning. His words felt clumsy, but the villagers nodded in approval. Throughout the day, he worked alongside them, tending the fields, caring for livestock, and repairing homes damaged by a recent storm. The Sunlands people moved with purpose, their actions infused with a quiet confidence that Enki began to envy. In the evenings, they gathered around the central tree for storytelling and teaching. The elder spoke often, sharing parables and lessons about abundance, gratitude, and resilience. Enki listened intently, absorbing every word. The test of patience days turned into weeks, and Enki found himself checking the spot where he had planted the seed every morning. At first there was nothing but bare soil. Doubt crept into his mind, whispering that perhaps he had done something wrong. Patience. the elder reminded him, one evening as they sat by the fire. Abundance does not come on our timeline, but its own. Trust in the process. Still, the waiting was difficult. Enki took quiet moments to sit by the planted seed, closing his eyes and visualizing its growth. He imagined roots spreading deep into the earth, a sprout breaking through the surface, and leaves unfurling toward the sun. Slowly, he began to understand what the elder meant. Abundance was not just about the seed itself, but the faith and care he poured into it. One morning, after nearly a month had passed, Enki approached the spot and froze. A tiny green sprout had emerged from the soil, delicate but unmistakable. His heart leapt, and he knelt beside it, marveling at the fragile promise of life. The elder approached, a proud smile on his face. "Do you see now, Enki? Abundance begins within. It grows not just from the soil, but from the belief and care you invest in it." Enki nodded, his chest swelling with pride and understanding. "I see it, and I'll never forget it." Months passed as Enki integrated into the Sunlands community. The sprout he had planted grew steadily, its delicate leaves unfolding and stretching toward the sky. Every day, Enki tended to the tree, watering it carefully and whispering quiet words of encouragement. The villagers began to gather around it, curious about its progress and drawn to the care Enki poured into it. As the tree grew taller, its presence became a symbol of resilience and hope for the Sunlands people. Its trunk thickened, its branches spread wide, and it bore small flowers that seemed to glow in the sunlight. The villagers began calling it the Tree of Hope, a testament to Enki's belief and effort. "This tree is a reminder," the elder said one evening during a gathering. "Abundance does not come from taking alone, but from giving, nurturing, and trusting in the unseen." Enki stood silently, gazing at the tree. He felt a deep connection to it, as if it mirrored his own growth. One day, panic spread through the Sunlands as a herdsman rushed into the village square, his voice trembling with urgency. "The cattle are sick! They won't eat or drink! If they die, we lose our lifeline!" The villagers gathered quickly, their faces pale with worry. Among them stood the high priestess, a revered figure who held deep knowledge of the Sunlands' native plants and remedies. She stepped forward, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the rising tension. "Bring me to the cattle," she said, her voice commanding yet serene. The herdsman led the group to the grazing fields, where the cattle lay listless, their breathing shallow and labored. The sight was enough to draw murmurs of despair from the villagers. The high priestess knelt beside one of the animals, her hands moving deftly to examine its condition. "They have been poisoned," she declared, standing to address the crowd. "The stagnant water they drink carries sickness, but the Sunlands provides remedies for all ailments." She ordered her acolytes to gather specific herbs and prepare a poultice, her confidence reassuring the villagers. The group worked swiftly, grinding and mixing the plants into a thick paste that was then applied to the cattle's mouths. The villagers watched in anxious silence, their hopes pinned on the high priestess's expertise. Hours passed, but the cattle showed no signs of improvement. If anything, their condition worsened, their breaths becoming more labored. The high priestess frowned, her hands tightening into fists. "This should have worked," she muttered, frustration and doubt creeping into her usually unshakable tone. Enki, who had been observing quietly, stepped forward. "May I try?" The high priestess turned to him, her eyes narrowing. "You think you can do what I could not? These remedies have been trusted for generations." "I don't doubt your wisdom," Enki said humbly, "but I have a connection to animals. I can feel what they need." The elder nodded toward the high priestess. "Let him try. At this point, we cannot afford pride." Reluctantly, the high priestess stepped aside. Enki knelt beside one of the cattle, placing his hand gently on its side. His fingers felt the rhythmic rise and fall of its shallow breaths, and he closed his eyes. For a moment, the chaos around him faded. The murmurs of the villagers, the hum of insects, even the warm breeze of the Sunlands. "When I was a child," Enki began, his voice low and steady. I realized that animals don't just speak with their sounds, they speak in silences, in movements, in rhythms. The villagers leaned in, captivated. Even the skeptical high priestess paused to listen. They speak in the flick of an ear, the shift of weight, the way their breath hesitates before it steadies. Enki continued, It's a language as old as the wind and the trees, one you don't learn with your ears but with your heart. He turned his focus fully to the cattle, stroking its flank. You've lost faith in what the earth is offering you, he murmured to the animal. But the water is clean now. It will give you strength. Enki looked back at the villagers. Animals trust differently than we do. Their trust is fragile, and when it's broken, it takes time and care to restore. If we listen, not just with our ears, but with everything we are, we can remind them that the world isn't always harsh, that it can also be kind. The villagers exchanged glances, their skepticism beginning to waver. How will you make them believe that? The high priestess asked, her tone softer now. I will tell them with my actions, Enki replied. The way I speak to them, the way I show them the water is safe. Trust is built one heartbeat at a time. Enki moved among the cattle, his steps slow and deliberate, his voice a soothing melody that carried on the breeze. He hummed low, a sound that blended with the rustle of grass and the distant chirping of birds. You don't need to fear, he whispered to the nearest cow, stroking its flank. The ground remembers your strength. The water will heal you. The animal shifted, its heavy head lifting slightly to meet Enki's gaze. He smiled. You are strong, stronger than you know. Trust the earth again. Trust me. One by one, the cattle began to respond, their hesitation melting away. Slowly, they approached the newly filtered water and began to drink, their tongues lapping at it tentatively at first, then eagerly. The villagers gasped, watching in astonishment. It's working, the herdsman whispered. The high priestess stepped forward, her voice tinged with awe. You spoke their language. You didn't command them. You invited them. Enki nodded. Abundance begins in trust, and trust begins in listening. That's the language of animals and of life itself. The elder placed a hand on Enki's shoulder, his expression warm and proud. You've given us more than healing today, Enki. You've reminded us of the harmony we share with this land, with its creatures, and with each other. The villagers cheered, their spirits lifted, not just by the recovery of the cattle, but by the lesson Enki had shown them. The Sunlands had once again found its balance, and in the hearts of its people, abundance grew. As the months rolled on, Enki became an integral part of the Sunlands community. He worked alongside the villagers, planting crops, repairing homes, and tending to the livestock. He memorized the names of the people he saw every day. Kira, who wove baskets, Mavin, the young boy who loved to fish, and Elder Leor, who always had a story to share. The gratitude circle continued each morning, and Enki found himself speaking more freely about the things he was thankful for. I am grateful for the strength of the Sunlands people, he said one day. You have taught me more than I could ever have imagined. The tree of hope continued to grow, its flowers now giving way to small fruits. The villagers celebrated its progress, gathering around it in the evenings to share stories and songs. The omen of water. One evening, as Enki sat beneath the tree of hope, he noticed a flock of birds circling high above. Their movements were frantic, their calls sharp and urgent. He frowned, watching them intently. What do they see? He murmured to himself. The elder approached, his brow furrowed. The birds carry warnings if you know how to read them. What do you see, Enki? Enki stood, his heart pounding. They're moving away from the river, toward higher ground. It's as if they sense something coming. Water, too much of it. The elder's expression darkened. A flood. Enki turned to the villagers who had begun to gather, their faces anxious. We have to prepare. A flood is coming, and it will test everything we've built here." The villagers were gathered in the Sunlands central square, their faces painted with worry as Enki's warning echoed through the crowd. The murmurs began almost immediately. Villagers exchanged doubtful glances, their voices rising in confusion and frustration. "Why should we trust him?" one man said, crossing his arms. "He's not even one of us. He's an outsider, just passing through." "What does he know of the Sunlands?" another villager added. "We've survived droughts and harsh seasons before without some stranger telling us what to do." Enki stepped forward, his hands open in a gesture of peace. "I understand your doubts. I would feel the same if I were in your place. But this is not a drought or a harsh season. This is something else, something we can prepare for if we act now." A woman's voice rose above the crowd. "And what if you're wrong? What if we waste our time and resources preparing for a flood that never comes? You would put us at risk for no reason." The skepticism cut deep, but Enki stood firm. "If I am wrong, we will have only strengthened ourselves as a community. But if I am right and we do nothing, we risk losing everything." The crowd began to grow restless, their skepticism morphing into outright anger. Before the tension could boil over, the elder raised his hand, calling for silence. "Enough," the elder said, his voice carrying authority and calm. He stepped forward, his weathered face scanning the crowd. "I understand your fears. Change is never easy, and trusting a stranger is harder still. But this young man has not come here to spread fear. He has come to share what he has learned." The crowd quieted, though doubt still lingered in their eyes. "We in the Sunlands have faced many trials," the elder continued, "and each time we have survived because we stood together, not apart. When the droughts came, we worked the earth as one. When the winds threatened our homes, we rebuilt as one. And now we must trust one another once more. Enki is not just a stranger, he is one of us. For he has walked our lands, shared our meals, and worked alongside us. Would he warn us of this flood if he did not care for our lives?" The elder paused, letting his words settle. "We prepare, not because we fear, but because we have faith. Faith in each other and in our ability to overcome. If the flood does not come, we lose nothing. But if it does, we will have gained everything by standing united." The murmurs softened, replaced by a tense but hopeful silence. Despite the elder's words, not everyone was convinced. As preparations began, small groups of villagers resisted. "This is foolish," one farmer muttered, refusing to move his tools to higher ground. "We're chasing shadows!" Another villager scoffed as Enki and others dug trenches to redirect potential floodwaters. "You think this will save us? It's a waste of time." Even the high priestess, who had begun to see Enki's wisdom, approached him with hesitation. "What if they're right, Enki? What if the flood does not come and this effort divides us further?" Enki paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Doubt is natural," he said softly. "But doubt is also a chance to grow. Let the land show us the truth. All I ask is for a little more faith." The flood arrives. When the flood finally came, it came with a vengeance. The waters surged through the Sunlands, uprooting trees and washing away crops. Those who had resisted preparation scrambled to higher ground, their skepticism giving way to fear and regret. The villagers, who had trusted Enki's warning, worked together, guiding others to safety, saving livestock, and securing essential supplies. Even those who had doubted him earlier began to follow his lead. As the waters receded, the damage became clear. Much of what they had built was gone, and despair threatened to take hold. Enki stood among the villagers, his heart heavy. "This is too much," one villager said, their voice breaking. "How can we start again?" Enki looked to the tree of hope. Despite the destruction around it, the tree stood firm, its roots deep and its branches reaching skyward. A single fruit hung from its branch, glistening in the sunlight. He stepped forward, placing a hand on the tree's trunk. "This tree is still here," he said, his voice steady. "It survived because we cared for it, because we believed in it, and we will do the same for this village. We have the skills, the strength, and the knowledge to rebuild." The elder joined him, addressing the villagers with a firm but gentle voice. "We are not just the land we walk on. We are the hands that plant, the hearts that give, and the voices that sing. We are not what we've lost. We are what we choose to rebuild." Inspired by their words, the villagers set to work. They salvaged what they could, leaning on each other for strength and support. Enki led efforts to replant crops, repair homes, and restore the village's spirit. The Tree of Hope became a rallying point, a symbol of resilience and unity. It was named Enki's tree, a testament to his journey and the lessons he had brought to the Sunlands. Through their shared effort, the Sunlands flourished once more, stronger and more united than ever. One quiet evening, as the Sunlands settled into the calm hum of night, the elder approached Enki. The fire crackled softly between them, its light dancing on their faces, casting shadows that seemed to whisper secrets. The air was heavy with unspoken words, and the elder, after a moment of thoughtful silence, began to speak. "Enki," the elder said, his voice deep and steady like the roots of a great tree. "There is a story we tell here in the Sunlands, one that has guided us through times of uncertainty. May I share it with you?" Enki nodded, leaning closer to the fire. The elder's gaze turned to the heavens, as if reading the tale from the stars themselves. Long ago, before this land was called the Sunlands, there was a single sapling that grew amidst a barren desert. Its roots searched endlessly for water, yet the earth refused to yield. The sapling was fragile, its branches thin, its leaves few. Many who passed it pitied its struggle, certain it would perish beneath the unrelenting sun. The elder paused, his eyes now reflecting the flickering flames. But one traveller stopped. She did not bring water or shade, for she had none to give. Instead she sat beside the sapling and spoke to it, softly, each day. "Grow," she said, "not because the ground is kind, but because the sky will rain again. Grow, not because the earth is generous, but because you are meant to thrive." Her voice, gentle yet persistent, carried hope. He smiled faintly. Seasons passed, and though the desert remained harsh, the sapling grew taller and stronger. Its roots dug deeper, finding hidden springs beneath the surface. When the rains finally came, it drank fully, its leaves turning greener than any had seen before. And when the traveller returned many years later, she found not a sapling, but a great tree, its branches providing shade and shelter to all who sought it. The elder turned his gaze to Enki, his voice softening but gaining weight. "That tree is said to be the first seed of abundance planted in this land. Not because the desert was kind, but because the sapling believed it could endure. That belief, Enki, is what sustains us." Enki's heart swelled as the story unfolded, the weight of its lessons settling over him like a warm blanket. The elder leaned forward now, his tone more pointed. "Enki, you came to us seeking abundance. You have seen it, felt it, and helped it grow in ways we could not have imagined. But now I must ask you, what will you do with it? Will you stay and nourish the seeds you've planted here? Or will you carry this gift to lands that still thirst for it?" Enki's breath caught in his chest. The question pierced him in a way he hadn't expected. He stared into the fire, its embers swirling like the thoughts in his mind. I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The elder placed a hand on Enki's shoulder, his grip firm but kind. "Sometimes the answer is not found in the words we speak, but in the dreams we dream. Let the night guide you, Enki, as the stars guide travelers lost in the desert." That night, Enki lay beneath the stars, sleep tugging at him like a gentle tide. In his dream, he stood once more, in the endless green pastures, the sky brushed by trees that reached for the heavens. Under one of these trees, his parents danced. His father, Tarin, strong and vibrant, moved with a grace that seemed eternal. His mother, Nahla, young and joyful, twirled with him, her laughter a melody carried on the wind. Enki took a step forward, his heart swelling. Taran turned to him, his eyes filled with pride. "Your journey has begun, my son," he said, his voice echoing like the wind through leaves. "Your kingdom awaits." The scene shifted. Taran faded into light, leaving Nala behind. Her movement slowed, her figure weathered by time and hardship. She sat beneath the tree, holding a child in her arms, a younger Enki. But the child vanished, and Nala aged further. She sat alone beneath the tree, her frailty illuminated by the golden light around her. "Come home, Enki," she whispered, her voice a song carried by the wind. "Come home!" Enki awoke with tears streaming down his face. The first light of dawn touched the horizon, and he knew what he had to do. The villagers, sensing Enki's decision, prepared a grand farewell for him. The streets were adorned with flowers, and the scent of roasted fruits and freshly baked bread filled the air. Songs were sung, stories were told, and laughter echoed through the Sunlands. As the celebration neared its end, the elder approached Enki, holding a small bundle wrapped in a cloth woven from Sunland's grasses. He unraveled it to reveal a single branch from Enki's tree, its leaves shimmering like emeralds. "This," the elder said, "is a part of you as much as it is a part of us. Take it with you. It is a seed of abundance. Spread its promise wherever you go." The high priestess stepped forward, handing Enki a pendant carved in the shape of the Tree of Hope. "For protection," she said, "and to remind you that abundance is not only in the land, but in your heart." Enki looked at the gifts, his heart full of gratitude and sorrow. "I will carry your lessons with me," he said, his voice steady, "and I will honor them in every step I take." The villagers stood in silence as Enki turned to leave, their faces lit by the glow of the tree. As he passed beneath its branches, he placed a hand on the bark one final time. "Thank you," he whispered. And with that, he began his journey home, carrying the seed of abundance, the pendant of hope, and the memories of a people who had shown him the true meaning of resilience and abundance. The path stretched endlessly before Enki, winding through sunlit plains and shadowed groves. The seed of the Enki tree rested securely in his satchel, its presence a quiet reminder of the Sunlands and all he had learned. Though he carried its hope, his heart was heavy. The faces of the villagers, his mother's frailty, and his grandfather's doubts lingered in his thoughts. On the third day of his journey, as the light of the afternoon softened into gold, Enki noticed movement in the distance. A figure crouched by the road, their form shrouded in a tattered cloak. As Enki drew closer, he felt the tension in the air. The figure turned suddenly, revealing a man with sharp, wary eyes. A makeshift blade glinted in his hand. "Your bag!" the man demanded, his voice hoarse and cracked. "Give it to me!" Enki stopped, his instincts telling him to flee, but something deeper kept him rooted. He observed the man's gaunt face, the trembling in his grip, and the desperation that poured from his every move. "You don't have to do this," Enki said, his voice steady but kind. "There's another way." The man sneered, stepping closer. "Spare me your speeches, traveler. I'm not asking." Enki raised his hand slowly. "I see the weight you carry, the hunger in your eyes, the thirst in your voice. It's more than your body that's starving. You think taking what's in this bag will fill you, but it won't. You'll still be lost, wandering, wanting." The man hesitated, his grip faltering slightly. "What do you know about hunger?" Enki stepped forward cautiously, meeting the man's gaze. "I've known hunger. I've known emptiness, but I've also learned that abundance doesn't come from what we take. It comes from what we build, what we give." The man's sneer softened, confusion crossing his face. "Build? Give? You speak in riddles." Enki smiled faintly. "Then walk with me. Let me show you what I mean." Reluctantly, the man, Varel, lowered his blade and followed Enki. The two walked side by side as the sun dipped below the horizon. They stopped to make camp beneath a canopy of stars, a small fire crackling between them. The fire burned low, casting flickering shadows against the trees. Varel sat cross-legged on the ground, tearing small pieces of the flatbread Enki had given him. His face, hardened by years of wandering, softened slightly in the quiet of their shared meal. "So, Varel," Enki began, his tone light yet curious, "what's led you to these roads?" Varel chewed in silence for a moment, his gaze fixed on the fire. Finally he sighed. "I wasn't always this lost." Enki leaned forward, sensing the weight behind Varel's words. "I used to have a family," Varel continued, his voice low. "A wife, a daughter. They lived in a little village by a river. The land was rich there, always enough for a good harvest. But one year the rains never came. The river dried up, the crops failed, and—" He paused, his hands clenching the flatbread. "I couldn't protect them. My wife grew sick. My daughter—" His voice broke. Enki waited, letting the silence hold the space between them. "I left after they passed," Varel said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't stay there. Everywhere I looked, I saw them. I thought if I kept moving, I'd outrun the memories, but you can't outrun what's inside you." Enki's heart ached for the man before him. "Varel," he said softly, "the pain you carry doesn't make you weak. It makes you human, and it's never too late to start again." Varel scoffed, though there was no malice in it. "Easy for you to say. You're going home. You've got people waiting for you." Enki shook his head. "Home isn't just a place. It's what we carry with us, the seeds we plant along the way. Even in the barren ground of loss, life can grow again. I've seen it." Varel stared at him, his skepticism slowly giving way to something like hope. "You speak like a man who's found his own river." Enki smiled faintly. "Perhaps. And perhaps I'm still digging the well." The market was alive with energy, a stark contrast to the desolation Varel had described. Merchants called out their wares, the air buzzing with conversation and the clinking of trade. Samir's stall stood out among the rest, his table lined with jugs of water and sacks of grain. "Enki!" Samir exclaimed, rushing forward to clasp his friend's hand. "By the gods, it's good to see you!" "And you, Samir," Enki replied warmly. "It seems the market has changed." Samir beamed, gesturing to his stall. "Changed! It's thriving! After your advice, I started selling what people actually needed. Water, grain, tools, and look at this." He pulled out a small pouch, jingling with coins. "I haven't seen business like this in years." Varel, standing quietly to the side, watched the exchange with interest. "So, you were the one who turned his fortunes around?" Enki chuckled. "I merely planted the idea. Samir did the work." Samir grinned, his gaze shifting to Varel. "And who's this?" "This is Varel," Enki said, introducing his companion. "He's traveled far and seen much." Samir extended his hand. "Well, any friend of Enki's is a friend of mine." Varel hesitated before shaking Samir's hand. "You've done well here," he said, nodding toward the bustling stall. "It wasn't easy," Samir admitted, his tone serious now. "I had to let go of a lot of old habits, selling honey and dried fruits no one wanted. But Enki's words stuck with me. Abundance begins with serving others." Enki smiled. "A market, like a river, thrives when it flows. Stagnation brings decay, but movement brings life. You let go of what held you back, Samir, and now the current carries you forward." Samir laughed. "Always the poet, aren't you?" Enki shrugged, his eyes twinkling. "The words come when they're needed." As the three continued to talk, Varel began to open up, sharing his story of loss and wandering. Samir listened intently, his expression softening. "You know," he said after a moment, "there's a farm not far from here, Karen's farm. It was on the brink of ruin, but now it's flourishing. Maybe you should see it, Varel. It might remind you that even in the harshest droughts, life can find a way. Varel glanced at Enki, then back at Samir. A farm, you say? Samir nodded. You won't believe your eyes. Kieran owes a lot of his success to this one here, he added, clapping Enki on the shoulder. Then we'll go, Enki said, meeting Varel's gaze. There's more for you to see. Varel hesitated, then nodded. Lead the way. The dirt path wound through dry fields, the soil cracked and parched in the relentless sun. Yet, as they approached Kieran's farm, the landscape shifted. Rows of vibrant green stretched before them, dotted with plants that seemed to defy the barren surroundings. In the distance, a large tree stood tall, its leaves thick and shimmering under the sunlight, a beacon of life amidst the desolation. Varel slowed his pace, his eyes wide with disbelief. This can't be the same land you spoke of. Enki smiled knowingly. It is. Kieran's farm stands as proof of what abundance can create, even in the harshest conditions. Kieran emerged from the doorway of his modest home, wiping his hands on a cloth. His face lit up when he saw Enki. Enki! He called, striding toward them. You've returned. I have, Enki replied warmly, clasping Kieran's hand. And I've brought a friend. He turned to Varel. This is Varel. He's seen much hardship, but has a heart open to change. Kieran extended his hand, and after a moment Varel shook it. Welcome, Kieran said. Come, both of you. You must be tired from your journey. Kieran led them inside, where the scent of freshly baked bread filled the air. A table was already set with simple but hearty fare, warm bread, bowls of grain porridge, and fresh vegetables from the farm. Varel hesitated, his gaze darting between the food and Kieran. So, you're saying... This land, Varel said, his voice tinged with disbelief. It's alive. It's nothing like what I've seen on my journey. Everywhere else is barren. Kieran smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair. It wasn't always like this. This farm was as cracked and lifeless as the lands you speak of. He glanced at Enki. But it only takes a single seed to change everything. Enki tilted his head, intrigued. The tree of life, he said softly. Tell us more, Kieran. Kieran's eyes softened as he spoke. When I first got the seed, I didn't think much of it. To me, it was just another useless thing, a relic from a trade I'd made at the market. The ground was dead, and I was desperate, so I planted it out of frustration more than hope. He paused, his voice growing heavier. For days nothing happened. Weeks passed. I thought the seed was as worthless as the land itself. Varel frowned, his gaze flicking between Kieran and Enki. What changed? Kieran let out a deep sigh, his voice growing reflective. I started to notice small changes. A sprout breaking through the soil, the way the roots clung to the ground. It wasn't just surviving, it was thriving in the harshest conditions. That seed, which I thought was worth nothing, became a tree that now provides healing and life like nothing I've ever known. He gestured to the flourishing fields. I see it every day. Abundance breathes. It's a cycle, a give and take. Can it help my mother? Enki asked softly. Kieran's expression grew solemn. If you prepare it properly, yes. Varel, who had been silent, finally spoke. You've given so much, Kieran. Why share this with us? Kieran chuckled. Because someone shared it with me, and now I share it with you. That's how abundance works, my friend. Enki turned to Varel, a small smile on his lips. See? The river flows. The morning after the heartfelt dinner, Enki stood at the edge of Kieran's farm, the soft hum of life surrounding him. The tree of life swayed gently in the breeze, its leaves whispering promises of renewal and hope. Varel stood beside him, silent but present, his gaze fixed on the tree as if drawing strength from its towering branches. Enki turned to Varel, a faint smile playing on his lips. This is your home now, he said. You've been lost for so long, but here you're rooted. Help Kieran grow this abundance. Varel nodded, his voice steady. And you, Enki, what's next for you? Enki glanced down the dirt road stretching out before him, the path leading back to his village. I have people to heal and a place to rebuild. What I've learned here, it's not just for me, it's for them. Kiran approached, his hands carrying a small bundle. Before you go, he said, take this. He handed Enki a cloth-wrapped package containing leaves from the Tree of Life, their scent earthy and calming. For your mother, these will help her heal. Enki accepted the gift with a deep bow. Thank you, Kiran, for everything. As he turned to leave, Varel called out, his voice carrying a weight of newfound conviction. Enki, wait! Varel reached into his satchel and pulled out the knife he had gifted Enki the night before. Take this too. You'll need it on your journey. Enki hesitated, then nodded, slipping the knife into his belt. I'll carry it with me, just as I carry everything you've both taught me. The journey back to the village was both familiar and foreign. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the land. The air was warm, but carried a crispness that hinted at change. Each step felt purposeful, as if the road itself was guiding him towards something greater. Enki's thoughts wandered to the Tree of Life and the countless lessons he had learned since leaving his home. The words of Kiran, Zambu, and even Varel echoed in his mind, weaving together into a tapestry of understanding. Abundance wasn't just about what he could take, it was about what he could give and what he could create. As days passed, the terrain began to shift. The barren, cracked earth slowly gave way to signs of life, a patch of green here, a trickling stream there. Enki paused by one such stream, crouching to fill his water skin. The faint hum of a song drifted through his mind, his mother's voice from years ago. It steadied him, reminding him of his purpose. Finally, as the sun dipped below the horizon one evening, the outlines of his village came into view. It looked the same as when he had left, but to Enki it felt entirely different. The cracked walls and dry earth no longer appeared as barriers. Instead, they seemed to hold potential, spaces waiting to be filled with life. The familiar sound of sheep bleating reached his ears, pulling his lips into a soft smile. Asa's absence was a pang in his chest, but even that carried purpose. His steps quickened as he approached the village gate, the weight of his journey falling away with each step. Inside the village, murmurs rose as people noticed him. Whispers of his name floated through the air. Enki, he's back! The voices carried a mix of disbelief, curiosity, and quiet hope. Enki didn't stop to explain himself. His first destination was clear. He made his way directly to his mother's home, his heart pounding with both urgency and resolve. The light from the fire inside flickered against the walls, casting warm shadows. Inside, Nahla was lying on her cot, her frail frame resting under a thin blanket. Her eyes fluttered open as Enki entered, her lips curving into a faint smile. "Enki," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with warmth. Enki knelt beside her, pulling the bundle of leaves from his satchel. "Mother," he said, his voice steady but soft, "I've brought something for you. This will help you heal." He carefully began preparing the tea, crushing the leaves and steeping them in water over the fire. The scent of the Tree of Life filled the room, earthy and calming. As the tea brewed, Enki spoke quietly, telling his mother about his journey, not in detail, but enough to let her know he had seen and learned so much. When the tea was ready, he helped her sip it, her fragile hands trembling as they held the cup, her eyes closed as the warmth of the liquid coursed through her, a faint flush returning to her cheeks. Enki sat beside her as she drifted back to sleep, his heart heavy with gratitude and determination. There was so much work to be done, but for now he allowed himself a moment of stillness, the quiet hum of his mother's breath filling the space. Outside, the village awaited, and Enki knew it was time to bring them the abundance he had found. The days following Enki's return were met with skepticism, curiosity, and whispers. The villagers were cautious, watching his every move. Enki began by speaking with the farmers, sharing the seeds he had brought from Kieran's farm, seeds that whisper life into silent soil, and seeds that bloom where none dare grow, sparked intrigue, but not full belief. "What do you plan to do now, Enki?" Barid, one of the market traders, asked. "This land has seen too much hardship." Enki addressed them, his voice calm but resolute. "I've traveled far and learned much. I saw a land that flourished even after being devastated by a flood. They rebuilt not just their fields, but their spirits. They thrived because they believed in abundance, and so can we." The villagers exchanged doubtful glances. "Abundance?" Barid echoed. "We can barely survive." "You see the barrenness," Enki replied, "but I see potential. We can awaken this land together. It begins with the tree of life." He explained the properties of the moringa trees, how they could grow in barren soil, provide healing, and serve as a resource the village could share with the world. "But to do this, we must work together." Enki gathered Barid, Lena, and other market traders. "You've told me of your struggles," he began, "but the solution lies not in waiting for buyers to come, but in creating what people need." "And what do they need?" Barid asked skeptically. "Life," Enki replied. "The tree of life. Its leaves can heal, its seeds can nourish, and its products can be traded. Help the farmers plant and grow these trees, then you can take the harvest and make this market thrive again." Lena crossed her arms. "And what if it fails?" Enki smiled. "Failure is only the beginning of success. Try. You've nothing to lose." Reluctantly, the traders agreed. They joined the farmers in tilling the soil, planting seeds and preparing for the harvest. For weeks the market lay quiet as its traders became farmers, their hands learning the language of the earth. After visiting his mother and beginning his efforts to bring the villagers together, Enki took a quiet moment to himself. He wandered to the edge of the village where a familiar stream ran shallow beneath the drought-stricken landscape. The spot had always been a sanctuary for him, a place to clear his thoughts. As he approached, he heard a familiar voice call out from behind him.
"There you go, talking to sheep again."
Enki turned and smiled. It was Cora, leaning casually against a tree, her arms crossed with a teasing grin. Her presence was like a breath of fresh air amid the tension of the village. "No sheep this time," Enki replied. "Just me and my thoughts." Cora stepped closer, her teasing tone softening.
"I can't believe you're back, Enki. I thought you were dead."
"I had to leave," Enki said, his voice heavy with the weight of his journey. "I needed to find something bigger than myself." Cora tilted her head, studying him.
"And did you find it?"
Enki nodded. "I found the Sunlands. I found answers to questions I didn't even know I had. But more than that, I found purpose." Cora sat down by the stream, motioning for him to join her.
"And now you're back to save this place."
"Not to save it," Enki corrected. "To help it save itself." For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, the stream whispering softly between them. Then Cora spoke again, her voice quieter.
"Your mother, I've been visiting her while you were gone. She missed you every day. She'll be happy to see you're here now."
"I've seen her already. You're about to see change like never before," Enki admitted. "And for everyone here, I want them to see what's possible." Cora smiled, her usual teasing tone returning.
"Well, if anyone can knock some sense into this village, it's you. Just don't start talking to the chickens, too."
Enki laughed, the tension of the day easing in her company. "I'll leave the chickens to you." As they parted, Cora's voice lingered in his mind. Her belief in him, playful as it was, gave him an added resolve. He wasn't alone in his efforts, and that was enough to keep him moving forward. Over weeks, the seeds began to sprout, tiny green shoots breaking through the cracked soil. The farmers marveled, disbelief etched on their faces. Word spread, and more villagers came to see the miracle. The once barren fields now bore signs of life. At the same time, Nala's health began to improve. Enki prepared the tea for her every morning, afternoon, and evening. Each day she grew a little stronger. Her laughter returned, her voice steadier. One morning she stepped outside, leaning on Enki's arm, and the villagers gasped. "She's walking again," someone whispered. "She's laughing," another added. Nala became the villagers' beacon of hope, her recovery mirroring the revival of the land. As she gained strength, so did their faith in Enki's teachings. Amar, however, remained skeptical. One evening, as Enki prepared his mother's tea, Amar entered the room. "You think tea and trees will fix everything?" he grumbled. Enki didn't respond immediately. Instead, he handed Amar a cup of tea and gestured for him to sit. "Let me tell you a story," Enki began, his tone soft but steady. "There was once a land of abundance. It had water so clear it mirrored the sky and trees that touched the heavens. But one day, the water rose too high, and a great flood swept through the land, leaving destruction in its wake. The people despaired. Many wanted to leave, to abandon the place they had called home. But their elder stood before them and said, 'We are not just the land we walk on. We are the hands that plant, the hearts that give, and the voices that sing. We are not what we've lost. We are what we choose to rebuild.'" Inspired, the people stayed. One brought seeds, another brought tools, and even the children brought flowers they had protected from the storm. Together they rebuilt, not from what they had lost, but from what they still carried within. Amar was silent for a long moment, the weight of the story settling over him. "And you believe we can do the same?" "I know we can," Enki replied. "I've seen it." Amar nodded, his expression softening. "You're just like your father, always dreaming." Enki smiled. "Dreaming is the first step. Building is the second." That night, Amar and Enki spoke about Taran until the early hours, bridging years of distance with shared memories. Months passed, and the village transformed. The fields flourished with moringa trees, their leaves a vibrant green. The market thrived, with traders exchanging tools and goods made from the trees. The once quiet streets bustled with laughter and activity. The villagers gathered for a meeting, one led by Enki. He stood before them, his voice steady and sure. "I want to teach you a new word," he began, "a word I believe you all already know." The villagers leaned in, curious. "Gratitude," Enki said. "Gratitude for the land, for each other, for the abundance that grows when we open our hearts and minds." One by one, the villagers shared what they were grateful for. The fields, the market, the tools, the trees, all were mentioned. Nahla, now strong enough to stand on her own, shared her gratitude for her son's return. Finally, Enki turned to Amar. "Grandfather, what are you grateful for?" Amar looked down, his hands clasped. The room fell silent, all eyes on him. He looked out at the villagers, his gaze lingering on Enki. Finally he spoke, his voice low but firm. "I'm grateful," he said, "for your return." The room erupted into applause, but Enki and Amar held each other's gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. The village had found its abundance, not just in the fields or the market, but in their unity, their resilience, and their belief in one another. Enki smiled, knowing his journey had been worth every step. Enki looked around at the faces of his people. They were no longer strained with desperation, no longer bowed by the burden of drought. There was life in their eyes, laughter in their voices, and the gentle hum of hope filling the air. He stepped forward, his voice calm and steady. "Abundance is not about what we have," Enki said, looking at each person in turn. "It's about what we believe. It's the seed we plant, even when the ground looks barren. It's the hands that work together, the hearts that trust one another, and the voices that remind us to be grateful for every sunrise, every drop of water, every breath." He gestured toward the now thriving market, the fields of moringa trees swaying under the moonlight, and the villagers who stood shoulder to shoulder. This is what abundance looks like. Not a single person alone, but all of us together, giving and receiving, building and rebuilding. The villagers began to murmur their thanks, their voices rising into a gentle crescendo of gratitude. Children laughed as they darted between the adults, and Nahla smiled softly at Enki, her pride in him shining brighter than the fire. Far beyond the edge of the village, under the shadow of the tree that had marked Enki's departure, Zambu stood quietly. His weathered face was turned toward the bustling village, the light of the fire flickering in his dark eyes. "They've learned," he murmured, more to himself than anyone else. "A heart that once feared scarcity now beats with abundance. My work here is done." He turned and began walking down the dirt path, his silhouette blending into the darkness of the horizon. As he went, the gentle breeze carried the faint sound of laughter and music from the village, a song of renewal and unity. Back in the circle, Enki looked to the sky. The stars seemed brighter now, each one a tiny promise of endless possibility. For the first time in years, the village was not just surviving, it was thriving. And Enki, standing among his people, said, "Father, is this what you've seen in your dreams?" You have reached the end of the tale of Enki, the journey to abundance and inner growth. This book is one of many of the soul-woven tales that have the theme of self-help and mental freedom. I hope you enjoyed it. Farewell, traveler. Remember, gratitude is the soil where abundance takes root. Without it, nothing can grow. Zambu.